Our next speaker is William Turner IV, Atmospheric Science.
In 1835, the slave ship Enterprise set sail from Washington, D.C. to South Carolina with approximately 80 enslaved people on board. And that's about the number of y'all in here right now. But the ship got caught up in a storm and ended up on the island of Bermuda, a free British colony where the enslaved were set free. In 1998, after a tornado ravaged my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, I said, wow, I have to study the weather. In 2011, after Syria experienced their worst drought, 1 million Syrians were forced to migrate from the rural areas to the urban centers. But this drought-induced migration amplified tensions leading to the ongoing Syrian war. So, how would you feel if you and your family were forced to leave California in 20 years due to more frequent droughts and in intensity, more intense droughts? So I study how weather and climate impact societies from a historical perspective. I use this knowledge to understand how climate change may spark conflict when people are forced to move from hotter and drier areas to more hospitable ones. So my current research focuses on how droughts affected the transatlantic slave trade. And so the transatlantic slave trade was this global economic enterprise driven by political, economic, and natural forces. And among the most prominent natural forces operating on the slave trade was the weather. Historians have suggested, based on the qualitative assessments of ship logs, journals, and chronicles, that severe drought played a role in affecting the slave trade. But they were unable to quantify this relationship or ascribe a physical mechanism for the droughts. So, from a quantitative perspective, I relate El Niño and its proxy association with West African rainfall with the slave trade. And so El Niño is this warming of the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean, and it can affect weather patterns worldwide. Scientists have shown that El Niño is linked to West African droughts. So using an El Niño data set that dates back to centuries past, I found that El Niño-induced drought conditions are associated with a decrease in the number of enslaved Africans transported from West Africa to the Americas. And so lessons learned from the impact of weather and climate on the slave trade reverberate today. And that is that extreme weather and climate change will continue to catalyze and amplify human conflict and migrations. And so I end with the West African word Sankofa, which means to not dwell in the past, but to learn from it and understand how we got here today so we can have a better future for tomorrow. Thank you.
This is a very multidisciplinary topic that you're dealing with, and I'm wondering, if you could give us a little bit more insight on how you came up with it.
Right, and that goes back to undergrad. So in undergrad, I studied Earth System Science and Engineering, which is fancy for meteorology. And I also minored in Afro-American and African Studies. And during my 5th year in undergrad, I had this opportunity to do research. And I was really questioning, well, how can I bridge the two together, history and science? And it dawned on me that the slave ships traveling back and forth from the African continent to the Americas, they were not motorized. So they depended on ocean currents and wind currents to get them back and forth. And so I was like, oh, okay, so let me study that. And then fast forward, I pitched the idea to my advisor, Terry Nathan, and he lit up like a Christmas tree and said, yeah, we're definitely going to study this. And it turns out, the more I read the literature, droughts popped up. And yeah. Okay. So, and now, of course, we experience the weather every day. So it's always great to have that human side of the science.
Did you have to look through records for the weather, or did you extrapolate? I mean, how does that work?
That's right. So I guess the one positive and negative about being an atmospheric scientist is that everything's on a computer. So, but because there is a historical side to this project, I was grateful to be able to find some of these ship logs and actually read and see just how detailed they were. So they recorded sea surface temperature, air temperature, wind speed and direction, even the types of clouds that they saw. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Yeah. But of course, the dreadful side is that when we're dealing with enslaved people, they were treated as a commodity. So they also documented for their cargo how many people, how many enslaved people were on board too.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
pretty interesting.
I'm sure it was. Do you, I'm going to change the topic a little bit, not quite. So you're talking about El Nino here. Are we in an El Nino pattern right now?
We are in a La Nina.
La Nina, I'm sorry.
And
yes, thank you for correcting my Spanish.
I'm learning too. But so La Nina, I guess one positive thing we could think about La Nina and the drought that we're experiencing right now in Cali is that we do expect a little drier conditions during the La Nina. So I hope La Nina don't last, another year or so. Go ahead and switch over. Bring some rain and snow for us.
Right, right.
So that's what we're hoping.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.